Good evening, everyone. I just want to say a few things about the event that we're doing here. And first, I'd like to give some thanks to Jan and Mike from Milkhouse Heaters. Round of applause to them. As well as Ron Boslum. He played earlier. Thank you, Ron. And we had a lot of food donations, so I'd like to let people know that too many to mention really, so a lot of that food was donated, and that was nice. My name is Reed Webster. I helped organize this, and I've been a member of the Rights and Democracy group for a while. Used to be with the Worker Center, used to be with the Windham County Democratic Committee, but this is what I choose to do now. I think that the direction that the Rights and Democracy group is going is where we need to be going. There's so many people out there struggling, and I'm going to read a few things that some of the talking points they want to talk about. And you know, we're in a economy that's thriving, but it's thriving only for the top. It's not, the everyday people are hurting, and we want to have a livable wage, but we really should have a thriving wage if the economy is thriving. So let's have some of that money trickle back down that never has trickled back down by keeping it at the bottom and not letting it go up. One thing, a lot of people, with people that are hurting, they need assistance, and a lot of people look down on them for assistance. But a lot of people don't understand is that every dollar of welfare that's given out, that dollar is spent immediately, and it goes around and around and around in the community. And the state actually gets $1.80 back on that dollar they give out, because it's taxed so many times as it goes around it, because it stays in the economy. And that's why a livable wage and raising the wage to $15 would be a very good way to inject some strength into the economy, because those dollars are going to go around and around again. It's a lot better to have the money in the people's hands than give it to the wealthy who are going to stick it in some offshore tax haven and collect mold. We need to have it working for us. And it doesn't, there's a lot of other issues. There's the opioid crisis, there's racism, and someone's brought out the worst of America. And it really bothers me to get up every morning to see what disaster has been caused. And the only way we're going to beat the money that keeps him in power is to organize and have the people have the power. And we do have the power if we put ourselves to it. So we need to have an economy that works for all, that is in harmony with the planet and all other living things that live with us. And we know that here in Vermont, we can lead the way. We've led the way on many other issues, and it's time to lead the way on this. We should have the health care. I was with the Healthcare is a Human Right campaign, and Medicare for All is so much cheaper than the system that we have right now. What we've got right now is we've got someone in the middle taking the lion's share that has nothing to do with healthcare. All they're doing is taking more and more, making healthcare more expensive every year because the CEOs need more money, the shareholders need more money, the lobbyists spend more money to keep them in power. They advertise. All those dollars don't belong in the healthcare system. They belong in healthcare. And so that's why a healthcare for all system, a Medicare for all, would work and be much cheaper. We also have to invest in renewable energy, clean water and public transportation, and that will create jobs. And we all know that fossil fuels is not the way to go. We have to wean ourselves off of those. Other countries are doing it, and we're stuck in this rut, and we can't get out of it. And we need to do it. And again, there's the moneyed interests with the fossil fuel industry making records amount of money and then getting subsidies on top of it. This has got to stop. You know, if they're going to be in business and make all kinds of money, they should be taxed for that. And that money can come back down to us so that we're not fighting amongst ourselves about, oh, I want the roads to be fixed, I want the school to be better, I want the fire and police to be better. Well, you know, we fight amongst ourselves with the few tax dollars that we have to make the community what we want. Well, we need to have a better community. It takes to some of the wealthiest to pay their fair share. And so that has to be done. And so hard for me to read some of this stuff. I don't have my glasses, but I'm gonna cut it short there. I think many of you agree with me, and I want to thank the Rights and Democracy Group. I want to thank the Healthcare and Human Rights Campaign with the Workers Center. I want to thank our legislators that have showed up, and all of you coming out to listen to the people and enjoy a good meal, enjoy some music, and at that point I'm gonna turn it over to our Lieutenant Governor and David Zuckerman, and I'm glad you could make it down, and I'm glad that you're going around the state with these forums and getting information out there to the people, because that's how we get the people involved. So thank you, and a hand for Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman.
Thank you, Reed, and thank you everyone for coming out, and a big round of appreciation, at least from me in my office, to Rights and Democracy and the Healthcare as a Human Right campaign out of the Workers Center for helping put this series of town hall meetings together all across the state. You know, one of the things that sometimes happens is, in all political circles, is you end up getting wrapped up in the quote halls of power and don't get out as much to visit with folks, listen to people, and make sure that your voices are taken back to Montpelier on a regular basis. And sometimes it's just a matter of getting out. I walked through town quite a bit today, looked at the island and some of the redevelopment that's going on there, met with some business owners today as well. And then now coming here when folks can come out in the evening, and please, if you haven't gotten any food throughout the evening, please feel free to grab some more. We can be pretty informal about this, this structure here, and really talk about what's happening. Talk about what people's day-to-day challenges are. Talk about what is the role of government in helping make sure that we as a community, the community of, you know, this county, the community of the whole state, can work together to make sure we're all going to bed in a safer, more peaceful, economically respected way. And we're not there right now. And ever since Reaganomics in the 80s, even before that, but really took off then with, as Reed mentioned, trickle-down economics. I think it's been much more sponge-up economics, and concentrated the wealth at the top. And that's why we are struggling to pay our taxes. Because it used to be that wealthy paid more. They got more money from the work-off workers, but they put more money back into the system to make sure education, roads, healthcare, day-to-day living was a little easier. And we've obviously watched that just disappear over the last 40 years while working folks have really struggled as our wages have stayed pretty much stagnant, while again, the wealth has been accumulated at the top. So these town halls about democracy essentially are a little bit of a rebuttal to this presidency, frankly. I first got elected the same night. I would have happily traded my victory for not having this president. Whenever you think about the Supreme Court and climate change, I wanted someone who's running for president now to have won the primary, but I still would have taken the alternative over this real demagogue who is really destroying the foundation of our democracy, destroying the idea that people here have a voice in the system and that it isn't just wealthy people who get to run everything, even though they have been for a long time. It's time to turn that upside down. And I'm actually really pleased that in 2018, we started to see a real shift. both in this state and across the country, with a much higher turnout and participation in democracy. And now the question is, what do those of us who are elected going to do with that message? And one of the things that I've been saying this last few months is that actually these 2 years are the best 2 years for us to pass the most progressive policies on wages, on climate change, on criminal justice reform, on education in our schools, gender and racial equality issues, and making sure people are respected for who we each are and not treated differently by law enforcement or by our school administrators and so forth. Because if we had a huge turnout and democracy increased in 2018, just wait till 2020 when this pariah is on the ballot again. And so therefore, anybody who sticks their neck out in the political arena to go a little farther than they thought they could, they're not likely to get booted out by the first-time voters who are coming in to say, we're not putting anybody like this guy back in office. Well, if you vote the opposite of that guy, you're going to get votes and be put back into office. And so I'm still pushing for your voice to be heard louder, for you to take the voice you have and use it, reaching out to your representatives, reaching out to your senators. Nader Hassan is here now, and I believe we may have 1 or 2 others showing up a little bit later. And they do hear from you. And they also, I think it's really important that in this day and age where politicians are sort of all evil, it's actually important to recognize we're not. And in Vermont, we have a lot of really decent human beings who are serving you in public office. And they are trying hard to learn about a huge range of topics and different perspectives that you as their constituents know and that their colleagues and other committees are working on. And sometimes you reach out to them and you might not hear back right away. Well, they're juggling. You know, there's 14 committees and lots of different topics, and then there's in the House, and then there's 11 committees in the Senate. Folks have thousands of constituents. A, I encourage you to reach out to them, but B, I encourage you to be patient with them as well. Ask them where they are on issues instead of, you know, just like any friendship you have or whatever you're trying to convince folks. A lot of you have done door knocking or work with others. If you go to someone in their face and you say, you better believe this, that doesn't usually work out that well, right? So just like with your legislators, I would say reach out, ask them where they are, offer them information. You're their resource librarians, you're their constituents, you're the ones with the day-to-day information of the struggles you're facing. Tell your stories. That's going to go a long way. And you can always, although it's a little ways away, occasionally come to the State House. And either your own legislator will help guide you around a little bit, or my office is always open and we can help guide you through the building or where committees are or what the topics of the day are. My Chief of Staff, Meg Polite, is here. She just raised her hand over there. That's the whole office. Meg is it. And then I flutter in and flutter out as I'm either running around the state or running around the building trying to do things. But we have a lot of ways for communication. Friday mornings, coffee hour, 8:30 to 10. If you happen to be able to have that time to come up, come sit with me and others who show up, talk about the issues affecting you. And then we also have the newsletter. Anybody know about the electronic newsletter? If you don't, you can sign up over here for it. It comes out every couple weeks on various topics ranging from a lot of things we're going to be talking about tonight, whatever's on your mind. And we do a Facebook podcast, town hall discussion with different organizations and different groups and different perspectives on issues. And so really, I'm welcoming you into the office and welcoming you to access the office for information, because I've really tried to turn the Lieutenant Governor's office into an information center and a democracy center for the state of Vermont. And Meg works ridiculously hard to reply to all your emails and contacts, as well as keeping my schedule and helping get the newsletter written and everything else. So sometimes if it takes a day or two or a week for her to get back to you, I hope you'll brace her with some patience as well. So I'm going to move into hearing from a couple folks that we have lined up to speak, because I'd really like to open it up for them to speak for a couple minutes and then hear your thoughts or questions, reflections. It doesn't all have to be questions as we talk about what's facing, Bellows Falls and this whole county that folks have come here from tonight, so that we get a chance to hear what's going on. So Ann Zimmerman is here. We're going to be speaking with the for minimum wage. She's with the Workers Center, and
Rights and Democracy.
Rights and Democracy.
We'll take it.
You'll take it.
And the women.
Both great organizations, as we know. Sorry to misplace the organization title. So Ann, come on up, folks. Please welcome Ann.
Wow, I don't do podiums and microphones all that often, so I'll do my best here. So I'm Ann Zuckerman, and I have been working with Rights and Democracy on the Raise the Wage campaign for a couple of years now, and the two main pieces of that are raising our minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024, a period of 5 years. And the other piece of that is getting a paid family and medical leave policy in Vermont, an insurance policy so that, you know, if you need to take some time off of work to care for a sick family member or something, you're not financially devastated by that. And these two bills would go a really long way towards building back up the dignity of work in Vermont and raising up people who struggle at the bottom. And we did actually have both of those bills pass our Vermont legislature last year, and they were vetoed by Governor Scott. So this year we have barely a veto-proof majority. So if we make some noise about these things, we can push these things through and possibly sustain, you know, override the governor's veto. And so yeah, I got involved in this campaign not because I wanted to do some kind of charity work, but because I have firsthand experience about what it is to struggle in Windham County as a low-income person. I was a single parent when my kids were young, and you know, I know a lot about what it takes to get by, and that our wages have not kept up with the cost of living. So getting a minimum wage up to $15 an hour will give something like 60,000 people in Vermont. A lot of those are going to be women and people of color. It would give a raise immediately, and you know, so they're more likely to be working low-wage jobs. And you know, I found my voice a little bit on this bill. I was asked to go up and testify at the legislature last year in front of committees, and I had never done anything like that before. And I found out how important it is to tell your own story about that. And I realized that my story was important, that, you know, how we piece it together, how we, you know, rob Peter to pay Paul, and, you know, stay up nights figuring out how we're going to pay for the car inspection, things like that, or, you know, that our legislators needed to hear that. And what I would say is that in Windham County, we have a pretty great crew of legislators who have heard that and who are supporting this. But I have to say that if you live in this district, your legislator needs to hear from you. Anyway. Say his name. He may show up here, Matt Traver. Should be supporting this at this point. Doesn't, you know, he did not support it last year. So what we are going to be doing is collecting stories. And we have a survey if anybody wants to help, if you know people who work for low wages, that we can collect stories and get in touch with people who can lean on our, and we also have a lot of new legislators. There's a huge freshman class, so we have to continue to pressure our legislators to support this. And it did pass in the Senate. Right now it has 2 committees that it's got to pass in the House before it can get a House vote. And the legislator from this district is in a really important committee, the Appropriations Committee. So, you know, that's something we'll need to be working on. And then the other, you know, what do I want to say about this? I deviated from my talking points here. It's important to remember that this is a 5-year path to get to $15 an hour. You know, they tend to hear from a lot of small business owners who immediately have this fear reaction, but what this is going to do is going to put money into the pockets of people. You know, they might be afraid, I can't afford to pay my people that wage, you also can't afford to have nobody who can come in and shop in your place of business. So giving, when I was suddenly across that line and I could walk into a sandwich shop or see a movie without such fear that I couldn't piece it together, it changes how you feel about yourself and the value of your own work. And there is some fear about the benefits cliff, and so it's important also to know that this is structured so that, once people cross that line, they're not going to lose their ability to pay for childcare. But as somebody who did use those benefits when my kids were young, I have to say I do not miss all of the time it took to go into those offices and fill out those forms. It's like another full-time job to keep track of those benefits and apply and reapply and fight for your, anyway. So the other piece of this that is important is paid family medical leave. We don't want working people in this state to be so stricken and devastated, because all of us at some point are going to have a situation, either our own illness or the birth of a child, or your father's dying in the hospital and you have no choice but to take that time off, to not have then your life turned upside down. And we have a really strong bill in the legislature this session. It's stronger even than the one that passed the House and Senate last time, but it does need us to rally behind it. So we need to create the movement. And I got involved in this largely because I was volunteering for a certain senator that we all love over in New Hampshire and all around, and I saw these issues being talked about on a national level, and then we saw what happened in 2016, and David talked about that too. And then there was this organization that was helping build the political momentum to get those things in Vermont, and that felt like a really doable thing, to create the political momentum to do those things in our state so that we can lead on those issues. And now, there are states surrounding us who have started to do that, and we can see that it's not a scary thing. And so anyway, one thing that you may hear is the governor talking about joining with the governor of New Hampshire and creating a kind of a voluntary paid medical leave program. And it's important that we recognize that that's not how insurance works. You have to have everybody in the pool. And so if we want a strong bill, let's just make sure that we let our legislators know that that's not what we want. We want every worker in the state. And right now we have a bill that includes more people than did last year, and more weeks, and also contributions from the employer and not just the employee. So it's actually, really worth, making phone calls. And we have a lot of the surveys over here on the table. If you know people and you want to grab a handful of those, and I can keep in touch with you about getting them back. And it's going to help us find the people who can, learn to tell their stories and feel empowered by that and join this movement. So that's it. That's all I have to say about this.
We'll have Ann back up after we hear from these next few folks. Stefan, you're going to be next. Stefan Gillum with the NAACP is here to speak about some of the issues I'm sure many people are familiar with in our community of color and the battles the NAACP is working on at the State House as well. So please welcome Stefan.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm a little tall, so sometimes that's a little low for me, but I'll make it work. So my name is Stefan Gillum. For those who do not know, I am the president of the Windham County. So this county right here is NAACP branch. We were chartered about a year ago now. So we're new, but we're moving in strong. I want to thank everybody for coming. This is something that we were asked to co-sponsor kind of like a few weeks ago. We were so excited to do it, so I'm really happy. And I'm also more personally invested because while I didn't grow up in Vermont, I've been here for a while, but I am from a blue-collar background. So my parents both worked in the blue-collar sector, so I definitely resonate with the values of rights and democracy on a personal level, and obviously the NAACP does too. I'll keep it short and brief. I know we have other speakers. So we have 6 game changers in the NAACP. I will talk a little bit about 4 of them, and then go into why we actually do support the things being proposed today. So one of our game changers is economic sustainability, and what that means is a chance to live the American dream for all. And we really want every person to have an equal opportunity to achieve success that is sustainable and have financial security. Another one of our game changers is health. We want health equality for all Americans, including a healthy life and a high quality health care. We want public safety and criminal justice, and that means an equitable dispensation, that word gets me every time, of justice for all. And another one that we have is voting rights and political representation. So exactly why we're here today, right? So we can all have time to analytically think about things. So on the agenda, there were a few different things: systematic racism, raising the minimum wage, paid family and medical leave, and clean water. We need to address systematic racism in Vermont. I'm sure everyone agrees with that on some level. We have a slew of recent events. My computer is doing things. We have a slew of recent events that have happened in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, all the way up to now, that have really showed us that we really do need to address this issue. Cases such as Gregory Zula, which I'm sure you've heard a little bit about. The ACLU handled that. The NAACP did help a little bit with that. Sheila Linton, Kaya Morris, and the subsequent court decisions that derived from those cases highlight our need to prioritize and deeply examine the intersection of race and our policing systems in the way that we point out, in a way that points out vital gaps that we can address as a community. But we also can't stop there. At the moment, we have racism via the dispensation of alt-right rhetoric, just to be honest, that is seeping into the country, and Vermont is not immune, unfortunately, to that. And we have seen that happening very strongly in the last few months. We have a few names, which I shall not speak, that we can all probably think back on, that have really doled out their fair share of white supremacy over the last few years. So we do support and really propel anything that can eradicate that. Thus, we also support the raising of the minimum wage. An increase in the minimum wage raises the standard of living for all workers. That means those people of color, women, young people, people who are just entering, and those entering into entry-level positions, which is what Vermont is trying its best to attract. It allows for those for lower socioeconomic statuses to get a chance, and those from higher socioeconomic statuses to actually be able to feel like they're contributing in a way via taxes and things like that that makes sense for the rest of us. Because right now we're not feeling their contributions so much, at least I'm not. I don't know if you knew this, but you probably do. Most workers on minimum wage are now living below the poverty level. I can tell you that when I first started working, I lived below the poverty level. So it's very important that we do push that. Increasing the minimum wage, as said before, increases jobs, it does not kill them. It strengthens the economy, it does not weaken it. And when we have more money, you spend more money. And you spend more money around you more easily. For that reason, we do support, the NAACP of Windham County does support an increase in minimum wage over the 5-year plan. Another thing that the Windham County NAACP does support is paid family medical leave. We believe that the need of a minimum of 12 weeks of paid family leave at 100% pay instead of 60, 70, 80% pay is important due to the oftentimes paycheck to paycheck financial situation of a lot of middle-class Americans today. There's the big fear that if people have to take off time, as you said earlier, that their financial situation will become from slightly stable to very unstable within a matter of weeks, months. Most people can't even go a full month without a full paycheck and are able to survive. With that being said, it also means that those who have lower than middle income lives, who live paycheck to paycheck, are coming from financially maybe unstable situations to very bad situations if one crisis happens in their life. And as we all know, crises do happen all the time, especially if you come from a larger family or a community such as this, where you're connected to people in a way that, like family. And so for that reason, we do support paid family leave and medical leave as well. And lastly, I told you I'm going to keep it quick today. And lastly, we do support clean water and the goal to move to 100% renewable future for Vermont. Yes, which is great for the NAACP because we're really getting into the environmental stuff. We even have like a kind of a FEMA-style response now that we're doing nationally. So we're really embracing this environmental movement agenda. We support a renewable future where all in the state can enjoy the benefits of clean water, so that the following generations, as well as our own, can see and enjoy the benefits of living in a place that has a healthier ecosystem. I'm a bug guy, I love entomology, so I really like healthy ecosystems. Agriculture practice that fosters the future generations, and food resilience, which is a big, huge issue, and promotes diverse wildlife habitats, which gives us all a happier and healthier place to roam around in when we go into the green, trees around us. Although some of it seems hard fought, I think these are all doable things, especially in Vermont, because we're all connected in a way that is unique in this state, and very few other states, I can think of a handful, might also have this privilege. So I think that we're really in this position to be a model in these ways, and I'm really hoping from the bottom of my heart, that the NAACP can play a vital role in that. And with that, that's all I have to say. I look forward to questions later if we could do that.
We're going to do that. Sure. Thank you, Stefan. I want to point out that one of the things I've been really excited to see over the last few years, I've been doing this little political involvement public service gig for 20 odd years now. And what I've seen happen in these last few years, and certainly Bernie was an inspiration for me back when I first started getting engaged back in about 1992 and 1994 when I first ran, talking about how interconnected these issues are. If you think about it, when we talk about raising the minimum wage, part of that, as people can move out of a tremendous struggle of day to day, it's a lot harder for the other side to then exploit and say, that person over there is the reason you're struggling. That person over there is your problem, which is what this president and the other demagogues do, right? But if the wages are higher and folks can actually not have to work 60 hours a week and be struggling every day to easily suddenly go, wait, maybe it is that other person that's causing me my trouble, instead of going, maybe it's corporate power dominating politics that's causing me my troubles. So we raise wages, we also start reducing the finger pointing at the other, whomever the other is. And instead, actually have time to get to know each other and realize that the other is another person just like you, who's just trying to make it through the day, raise a family, or have a lovely partner, or whatever their gig is. And when we are working 60 hours a week and struggling paycheck to paycheck, and someone gets sick, well, that's the struggle, and you don't have time to think about other people or our incredible environment. Oftentimes, I think a lot of folks who are struggling feel shame that they should not feel about the fact that they may not even be buying recycled toilet paper, or buying a little bit extra on their energy bill to make it renewable energy, or whatever the various choices are that some people have and many people don't have. And so one of the reasons we're having this conversation, bringing together these different issues and folks fighting for these different issues, is also because we have so few people in Vermont that if we stay isolated in our camps of fighting for my issue over here and my issue over there, it's not going to be very many of us Yet when we bring these issues together and we stand by each other in all of these common struggles, then we have the voice and the power to create that change we want to have. So that's, both these first two speakers brought that to my mind as I was listening to them. And we have Ellen Schwartz from the Workers Center, now that I got the right organization going, with Healthcare as a Human Right. And she's going to present for a few minutes. And like you said, we've got Representative Assam here. And then we will all stand up here to answer thoughts or questions and so forth. Ellen, please welcome.
Thanks, David, and that's actually hard to follow. You sort of put it all out there. So, as David said, my name's Ellen Schwartz. I live in Brattleboro, and I'm a member of the Vermont Workers Center, and the Vermont Workers Center is part of the Raise the Wage Coalition. So we also support raising the minimum wage and the Family and Medical Leave Act. I'd like to see a show of hands of anybody in here who either yourself has had difficulty affording or accessing healthcare, or if you know somebody who has had difficulty accessing or affording healthcare. It's almost everybody in the room. And this is Bellows Falls, but it's typical for conversations we're having all around the state. It's probably no surprise to people in this room that so many people of us struggle to access healthcare, but it's really important to say it aloud because, as David was saying before, we can feel isolated and end up being made to feel like it's our fault and feel that isolation and shame that somehow we're not able to provide what our families need, whether it's healthcare or food on the table or heat, and that feeling of isolation and shame, that is not an accident that happens. That's actually how the power holders maintain their power, by keeping us divided. So it's really important that we're able to say, yeah, I can't do this, but it's not my fault. It's because the system isn't working for us. Just this week, I spoke to a couple of friends who are struggling to get health care. One of them is on Medicare, and she's a diabetic. She currently is able to get her insulin because she hasn't hit the donut hole yet. She's living on Social Security, and she's panicked about what's going to happen when she hits the Part D donut hole and she can no longer afford her insulin, or she has to pay for her insulin and can't afford other basic needs. The other person I spoke to, the other friend, is a person who's on Medicaid, and she, which is actually in many ways better than Medicare, I'm on Medicare myself. But her dental allowance hasn't allowed her over the last few years to get all the care she needs. She's now in a place where she needs to spend $4,000 to get all the things taken care of that she has basically put off because she couldn't afford them. And in desperation, she started a GoFundMe because she couldn't figure out how else to get her dental work done. And I'm sitting here thinking it's 2019 in the richest country in the world, and people are setting up crowdfunding sites to get basic medical care. There's something very wrong with that picture. So many of us who are needing health care are jumping through hoops to try to get the care we need, or we do without. But things aren't much better for people who work in the world of healthcare. Nurses and LPNs often have high patient loads, which means that they're spread too thin among too many patients, or they're mandated to work overtime, leading to exhaustion on the job. These are lose-lose situations for everybody. It's not good for the worker, it's also not good for the patient who has a caretaker who's exhausted or has too many patients to care for. In addition, small rural hospitals are at risk. Probably people here have heard about Springfield Hospital. The details about what's going on there are a little bit unclear. They haven't really been reported, but clearly something is wrong because they've had to lay off 27 people, and they've also, the people who are left have been given wage cuts. And I believe that the Rockingham Clinic in this area is also, as part of that cut, lost a couple of staff people. This is a rural state. We have poor to non-existent public transportation, and it's really important that we maintain small rural hospitals and clinics so that in addition to having things like health insurance, which enables you to pay for medical care, you can actually also access it because it's close enough to you that you can get to a place where medical practitioner, where you can meet with a medical practitioner. So some of you may remember that in 2011, after several years of grassroots organizing that people like Reed were a part of, Vermont passed Act 48, which was supposed to set us on the course to universal health care. That law is still on the books, but the universal system has yet to be funded. Meanwhile, two large hospitals, UVM Medical up in Burlington and Dartmouth Hitchcock closer to us, are basically conglomerating much of the medical care in Vermont and have created a for-profit corporation called One Care Vermont. It's an accountable care organization that is adding another layer of bureaucracy, another layer of CEOs and profit gouging to our healthcare system. I won't get into the details about what an accountable care organization is. It gets pretty much into the weeds pretty quickly, but basically it's saying that medical practitioners become quasi-insurers because they're expected to assume some of the risk that comes with financial risk that comes with providing health care. So they sort of assume some of that which is currently held by insurance companies. There are some good aspects of the accountable care organization. The thing they really tout, which is coordination of care. That's like a great thing. Like it's something we all want, our care to be coordinated, but it's something that doesn't require a for-profit system. In fact, if we had a publicly funded, universal publicly funded system, we would want it to have care coordination. So we don't need to have something like an accountable care organization to coordinate our care. What we really need is a universal publicly funded system that has care coordination. What One Care doesn't do is address the systemic barriers that get between us and the care we need. Things like high premiums, high deductibles, uncovered services, limited access to providers, and lack of access to culturally competent care. At the Workers' Center, we are organizing for the right of all people to health care. We're excited about the bill that Representative Jayapal has introduced in Congress, which goes farther than any other bill under consideration at the federal level. At the same time that that bill has been introduced, healthcare profiteers have public programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA in their sights. They're trying to chip away at funding and services, and they're promoting the false narrative that we, the richest country on earth, can't afford to provide healthcare for all of our residents. Because Medicaid in particular is under attack, we're organizing a March for Medicaid in Barrie on June 8th. We invite everybody here to join us, and we'll have carpools going up from Windham County. The march is to call attention to the need to preserve and expand Medicaid, because though Medicaid comes closer than any other program to providing universal care, there's still room for improvement. And of course, our ultimate goal is a universal system for all of us rather than the fragmented system that we currently have. I also want to lift up a couple of things that are going on in the legislature, and then I'll close out. One of them is a bill called S94. Becca Ballant is one of the co-sponsors of this bill, and the aim of this bill is to expand access to dental care for adults on Medicaid and Medicare. We're still trying to understand exactly how it would work, but we're really excited and encouraged that there's a bill in the Senate, and now crossing over to the House, I guess, that acknowledges the huge need for dental care in Vermont. The other issue I'd like to bring up is tied into the Raise the Wage campaign. A couple of years ago, the legislature voted to fund wages for direct care staff who work with people with disabilities at $14 an hour, and then promised another $1 an hour a year later. That second promise has not been met, and we're encouraging the legislature to make this the year when it is. It's truly unconscionable that people who are working, providing direct care to people with disabilities so that those people can live in their homes, themselves are having to go onto public assistance because they're paid so poorly for the work that they're doing. So please come check out our table, come talk with us about your own healthcare experiences, grab a little quarter sheet for the March for Medicaid, join us in Barrie on June 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. And finally, we do have Representative Nader Hashim here. Sorry for mispronouncing your name earlier. Great new representative from this part of the state. I know earlier was talked about this wave of new legislators. It's been really exciting to see him in the halls. He's been down in my office a few times, which is really exciting for me to be in communication with representatives, which is kind of a faraway part of the building from where my office is. So it's been great to see him and doing the work he's doing along with many of the other new legislators, really shifting, I think, the direction of the House in our direction on these issues that we had some struggles with in the last couple of years, and I think there's a little more momentum for them after this election and these new folks. So please welcome Representative Hashim.
Hi everybody. So it's really great to be here. So as you probably know, legislators right now, we have a week off from being up in Montpelier. It's like a breath of fresh air to be back home and not sprinting around the State House all day. So I was asked to speak tonight, and I figured that I can just dive right into it and talk about what we've been doing in my committee. I currently serve on the Judiciary Committee, and just to provide you folks a bit of background, I've lived in Vermont for about 8 years now, and prior to becoming a legislator, I actually worked right down the road at the Westminster Barracks as a state trooper. And, I went into that job with a bit of a different mindset. Back when I was trying to figure out what to do with my life when I was in college, I was, studying politics, and I was looking at our criminal justice system, and I realized, not only do we incarcerate more people than any other country in the world, but we have these huge racial and economic disparities in our criminal justice system. And so, I figured instead of trying to become an attorney or a professor, I was just going to dive right into it and be that change that I wanted to see in law enforcement itself. And in going into the legislature, one of my ideas, one of my plans is to bring what I've experienced as a trooper into the State House. Because, it's one thing to read about poverty or read about the opioid crisis, but it's another thing to actually go into these homes that are on the back roads and see the actual conditions that people are living in. It truly opens up your eyes, and that's the perspective I'm trying to bring up there in Montpelier. So back to the actual work that we're doing up there. So I serve on the Judiciary Committee, which is it's basically the committee that governs cops, lawyers, and judges in a very small nutshell. And one of the first bills that I introduced, that I'm very proud to have introduced, is a prohibition on private prisons. And this is something that this is something, like I mentioned, we incarcerate more people than any other country, and just the mere fact that we, in our economy, are willing to attach capitalism to incarceration it's terrifying. It should not be that way. When it comes to prison, it needs to be seen as a way to rehabilitate people, to get them back into society so that they do not commit crimes again. That's what we're looking for, right? And private prisons are the opposite of that. They make their money off of having people in jail, and we don't want that in Vermont. And another bill that we just started working on just last week, me and Representative Colburn out of Burlington, we were working on a bill to allow all folks to have access to public defenders in the event that they enter the criminal justice system. So some of you may not know, but you won't necessarily get a public defender if you enter the court system. And per our 6th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, you have a right to an attorney if you're charged with a crime. However, there is a list of minor misdemeanors which currently do not fall under that. And so we are working to expand that to make sure that everybody gets access to public defenders, because in our opinion, it does not matter who you are or how much money you have or what crime you've committed. You have a right to a lawyer, and you have a right to a fair and just trial. tying in more with the economy that we've been talking about tonight, we're also looking at broadening expungement. So for those of you who are not familiar, expungement has to do with removing the convictions of certain crimes from a person's criminal record if they have not committed any crimes and if they petition the court to have those convictions removed. So, said more simply, if you made a mistake when you were 19 or 20 years old, let's say you had too much to drink and you got behind the wheel and you decided to drive and you got arrested, 15 years later, 20 years later, that conviction will still be on your record. And that conviction will still affect applying for mortgages, applying for student loans, going into affordable housing. And there's the stigma of having a criminal record from decades ago. And in the committee's opinion, there's a unanimous consensus on this, thankfully. That should not affect you when you're trying to apply for jobs decades down the road, when you haven't gotten in any trouble and you're doing fine. So, actually a very quick funny story and then I can wrap it up. In our Judiciary Committee we have 3 Republicans and I don't do math in public, but about 8 Democrats on the committee. And there was one Republican who is very, very, very conservative. And I was actually having lunch with him the other day, and he said to me, he was like, I never thought in my entire life that I would support something like expungement, because it's my belief that if you commit the crime, then it's got to be on your record forever. And then he said, after hearing testimony from all these different people who've experienced this and all these different advocacy groups, he wants nothing more than to see expungement broadened for a number of crimes, because he believes that, if you've served your sentence, if you've paid your dues back to society, and you've been on a good track, that shouldn't prohibit you from getting back on your feet and living the best life that you can live. So that's really, really exciting, and I'm pretty pumped to get back up to Montpelier. I am loving my time down here, relaxing and just hanging out with folks. But yeah, that's Judiciary in a nutshell. So I'm looking forward to questions later on too. Thank you.
Well, I think when you think about that issue and our disproportionate policing against our communities of color, and you think about economic challenges for folks down the line further in their lives, that's some of the issues around legacy racism and systemic racism that end up continuing to create challenges in our society for our communities of color, brothers and sisters. So it's important as we look at each of these issues, not only to the specificity and importance that they are individually, but again, how they overlap with others that have led to these systemic challenges that we have. So I'd actually like to invite all of you back up, those who have just spoken, and anybody who's got a question or a thought you want to share, please raise your hand. Yeah, go right ahead. And if you just sort of belt it out a little bit, because it's the only mic, and we'll repeat it if we can't hear it.
So my name is Megan Harris. I actually live right over on Atkinson Street, and I have a couple concerns. I think the first is that when we're determining where people's funding for health insurance comes from, we really need to look at lowering the threshold of people's income. Right now, I had the experience before I got a new job that provided health insurance, where unless you are at 150% of the below the poverty line, you are not poor enough to get health insurance. And before I got my new job, I was in a situation where the day that I received my letter and my card saying that I was insured, the same day I also got a letter saying that I made too much money, $17,000 for the last year, too much money to afford health insurance, to be given health insurance to the state. So if we're looking at the reality, somebody shouldn't have to be 150% below what is already considered poverty to be able to be able to take advantage of some of these services the state tries to provide. The other thing, when you spoke about expungement, there are agencies that a lot of Bells Falls residents inadvertently get involved with, including DCF, where if you are applying, say, for a kinship, guardianship license or a foster care license in general, despite the fact that you have paid your dues to society, despite the fact that it is off your record, you are asked to give that information about your record. I think that if anyone who is going to have an interaction with this agency has anything on their record, that should not be cause for the agency. I'm sure you're aware of the investigations that are going on with the Vermont Parent Partnership. I believe it's called, with Larry Christ. They are leading a huge investigation about how Windham County is disproportionately affected by DCF involvement. And I would really task the legislator with doing a full-blown investigation about their involvement in families and their basis for taking kids. We have a crisis like that at the border right now, but we have a crisis in Windham County where families who are already struggling are being targeted either because of their own family's previous involvement with the agency or because I understand there's a delicate balance to strike between protecting children and allowing parents to parent, but a messy house or a late day to school once in a while shouldn't be the basis for people having their entire lives examined on the state level, particularly in a case where it seems like a lot of the courts really defer to the agency despite having the authority. So just my thoughts. Thank you so much.
I wanted to talk about healthcare for a moment. If you want to come over and talk about Medicare for all and how that might no longer have to be threshold based. And then if you want to also comment after that, that'd be great.
Okay. I just couldn't agree with you more. That basically what we want to see is one universal system. That's what Act 48 was supposed to create. Should Jayapal's bill actually get passed and signed by some future president, that's what that would create. And that if we had one system for everybody that didn't have income thresholds that we were all paying into, like so many other countries have, including some countries I've lived in, then you wouldn't have, you're not the only person who's sort of caught in that place where you're just like a few dollars over and then you can't afford to buy something through private. And the other thing I'll say about that is that with the way the economy is going, more and more people are working in the gig economy, so that instead of having like one job with benefits, they have 2 or 3 jobs, none of which carry benefits. So even if the number of hours is full-time or even more, 50 or 60 hours a week, but they're still not getting benefits because it's split up among so many different employers. So we couldn't agree more. Come join us on the March for, we call it the March for Medicaid, but it's really a march for universal health care.
And what you said about the Springfield, the health system, is that even if you did have insurance, the wait list is till December. You cannot get in to see a doctor until December.
Right.
So I was tasked, with this, your insurance ends at the end of the month. Okay, now I have to try to find someone to fill my prescriptions before at the end of the month. There's no doctor to see.
Right. And those are the kinds of hoops, and the provision, like making sure that we have adequate provision of health care.
So I'll just touch real quick on the DCF issue. That is something that a number of legislators are aware of. I know Representative Kornheiser from West Brattleboro is very adamant about this issue, that Windham County has the highest number when it comes to DCF and the termination of parental rights. I believe this is something that would fall into Human Services, the Human Services Committee. But it also makes me think about the criminalization of poverty as well, because there's so many folks where it's not necessarily their fault that they can't pay for heating in the winter, and then they have their kid taken away. These are the questions that I try to prompt as many folks to in the legislature to ask themselves when we're going about this legislation. But it is something that's on our radar. So I've heard it a number of times up there.
And I know our office has gotten a tremendous number of calls about DCF, and so we're also reaching out to Ken Schatz and others to really try to figure out what's going on. A few years ago there was a big pendulum swing because there were a couple of major instances that got in the news, and so the political winds react and say, okay, we need to be more on the side of taking kids out of those dangerous situations. And now that's sort of been too far. And before just sort of saying, well, so DCF is the problem, part of the problem is they're understaffed. the folks who are on the front lines working with these families don't have enough time to really be in there and see the circumstances and evaluate, wow, this is a situation around, economic injustice, and this person's struggling just to meet these different needs, and that, so it's part of this complex problem for sure. We'll ask the gentleman in the back, then we'll get 2 minutes.
As a foster parent, I understand the problems with DCF. I would have to say they're understaffed, but a lot of times, too much time is spent in court by the social worker. I mean, you don't have enough judges, there's not enough people adjudicating, the process takes too long. It takes 2 to 5 years. And that whole time period, the kid is being either bounced around or displaced. I mean, your money would be better spent actually having a social worker in the house monitoring the, helping people parent rather than helping guide people parent rather than taking the kid out and having that kid being bounced around. I mean, that's just my perspective, and to quicken the judicial process, because you can't have a kid just lying in wait for 5 years. And let's get down to it. A lot of it has to do with opiate addiction. And addiction is not something that's just going to go away in 5 years. It's something people are going to struggle with, and that's the problem. It's a seesaw. Kids are in and out of the homes because the parents are doing well, and I even have my own family members. They're doing well, and then they fall off the wayside, and then the kids are back into the system. So it's a difficult problem, but I would recommend just money better spent helping on lower end cases where assisting the parents on how to parent. What they need to do rather than being in court the entire day. I mean, really too much time is spent in court. And there's less people out on the field actually helping. It's just adjudicating.
That's helpful.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you want to comment to that?
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on that
Yeah.
real quick. Vermont itself, regarding the court process, Vermont is very lacking in attorneys and judges. And, we see Brian Grierson, Chief Superior Judge Brian Grierson, in judiciary very often, and he's telling us about how he has to essentially beg and plead for judges who are in retirement to come out and handle certain cases. And there's a committee, a subcommittee developed specifically for judicial retention to keep judges in the state. And so there are issues regarding essentially staffing and workforce development in our court systems. And just regarding opioid addiction in this county, myself and a number of other Windham County legislators, we've co-sponsored a bill to create a treatment docket in Windham County, which is, in my opinion, the way to address a number of the cases that are entering our courts where the crime or the civil issue is also attached to opioid addiction. So, yeah.
This is a really quick question about expungement. Are people that have marijuana convictions, has that been dealt with? Have their, quote, crimes been expunged from their records yet?
So not everybody, no. It's a process in which they've actually allocated, I think, don't quote me on the number, but I believe it's $200,000 in the 2019 budget for more docket workers, because it's not just a click of a button to expunge a record. It takes a person going through a number of files, and some of these files are very old, and so it takes a while. And so they're hiring more folks to get these older records expunged, and they're also trying to make the petition process easier for an individual to go to court to petition to have their record expunged.
And part of that would also hopefully include, actually, I would even argue some of the potential cannabis revenue to make it so that that is not a process that costs someone anything. Because already folks are struggling to pay their bills. You've got a record because you were pulled over once by a law enforcement officer, and now you've got to pay $60 or $80 or $100 to go through the process and get it expunged. That seems wrong to me as far as how government ought to operate. So there's a lot of pieces to look at this. It doesn't mean we're going to achieve doing that, again, without folks communicating with their reps and senators or writing letters to the editor, working with groups like Rights and Democracy and Workers Center, because that participation and those letters and those phone calls, especially the public letters in papers or online, those are what help shift the mindset of the general population that's mostly just working hard and believing what they're hearing, and then it's, oh, that's another way to think about it. So if you can help other people think about these things in this way, that will help make the space for the political folks to do what you want them to do. There's someone back there, yeah.
I have a couple questions. One is around healthcare. I have Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont, and I was on the phone with them one day, and they told me, and I'm not 100% sure if this is true, this is what I'm asking you, that they are not a profit, they're not a for-profit.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
true.
they're a nonprofit organization, so what that means is there isn't a shareholder element to them, but there are some people that get paid quite a bit of money, just like you get medical center.
Okay, well, I just want to, I heard the first speaker talk about healthcare, and it seemed to imply that all of the healthcare providers in this state are for-profit. So maybe it's important that we don't misstate certain things. That's one thing I wanted to clear up. The second is around the $15 living wage, which I am absolutely for people earning a living wage. What I wonder is, have there been studies that will determine how much the cost of living will go up when everybody is being paid $15 an hour instead of $7, whatever it is?
There actually are some studies, and I can't really cite the numbers off the top of my head or anything, but the experience of places that have instituted a $15 an hour minimum wage or are in the process of getting there, the fears have not really come to pass. It's an economic stimulant for those areas, because people at the bottom of the economy, they get a little bit more money to spend. They spend it, buy a little more food, or they buy those soccer cleats or whatever. But there are studies. There was one, in Washington State that you might have heard about that was discredited, that, painted some negative. It didn't really, wasn't looking at the right numbers. But there was a study done here, I think, for, maybe David knows the agency that did it. And you were looking at the potential loss of just a few thousand low-wage jobs, but considering, how much better off most people would be. Like if you, for instance, that's one thing that maybe, think about is, if you're working 2 or 3 jobs and you only have to then work 1 or 2 jobs, then maybe it's fine that other job disappears. Do you know what I'm saying? The work still needs to be done. If the work needs to be done, it needs to be done. And, people just need to be able to, the work that people do needs to be able to support them, period. We can't pay people to live in poverty and then expect, all the, social services to supplement the income that they should be making working.
No,
Yeah.
my concern actually is on the other end. And so if you're getting $15 an hour, but your price of food has gone up a lot because now the supermarkets are having to charge that much more.
The amount, maybe David wants to speak to this, but it's really a minuscule amount that we're talking about. I think Burger King Whopper or whatever it is that they serve is like 25 cents of difference or something like that. It's really the amount of the cost of that product that actually is wages at the lower end doesn't make it, it's not a super significant thing, but I'll let David speak.
So I can tell you directly from my own business experience as an owner of a farm. So wages are about 40% of the cost of my business. And therefore, if wages go up by 6%, that means my overall cost to my business is about 2.4% on an annualized basis. If it's going to go to 15 over a number of years, it's about a 6% increase per year. Now, those costs don't all get borne by the same amount of product being sold, because now if I can sell more product, because more people are buying it, then I actually don't have to increase my product by 2.4%. I can increase it by a lesser amount because I'm selling more of it. So there's a lot of ways where that cost gets spread out. And if you think about it, for instance, a 60-cent an hour increase is $1,200 a year. Well, there's no way that the cost of living is going to go up by that same 6%, because all of society's wages aren't going up 6%. And so if the reverse were true, then the fact that wages were held low for so long means there wouldn't have been inflation at all, right? So you can think about it that way as well. And will costs go up? A fraction. But will the affordability, which is a big happy word of our governor, go up much more so for the vast majority of people? And as was mentioned, it's estimated that about 60,000 people would see a pay raise, a fairly significant one over these 5 years, and about 2,000 to 3,000 jobs might be lost. Well, right now, Vermont has 10,000 jobs open and looking for people to fill them. So if there's a perfect time to do it, it's right now, because those folks could have an opportunity if we also provide job training and so forth. And some of these jobs are entry-level jobs out of high school anyway, even ones that are above minimum wage. So they don't even all require an extensive amount of added training. So there's room for those people to transition into other jobs. In some instances, sometimes the job and geography don't always match. But really the statistics look pretty clear right now that it is a vastly better circumstance for the vast majority of people. And that's one of the challenges of policymaking, right? Nothing that we do is better for 100% of the people. The question is, what's the overall balance? And I think it's pretty clear with the minimum wage that it is. Someone in the front you had, and then we'll get back to those two.
I'm from Putney, Vermont. I have a question about getting rid of cash bail in Vermont, following New Jersey's lead, and now I guess California is going that way as of October 1st. They've already passed they've already decided. And so that people who have not actually been convicted of a crime, but who don't have the money for cash, wouldn't be held in jail. So what I've seen in following New Jersey's experience, because I think Vermont should move in this direction, but New Jersey's also had the experience where it's up to local, it's not even just the judges, I think, but to determine whether someone should be held in detention rather than be released. And there's been a big problem in terms of poor people and people of color in particular coming through these algorithms that are being used. And then they end up being held in detention as, oh, well, these people aren't safe to release to the community, when in fact, often the things that come up on algorithms are things like, some traffic violation or something like that, that has nothing, it's really not at all. So I was just curious whether in Vermont we are now moving towards trying to get no cash bail and how it's being thought about so that it doesn't impact negatively, particularly people who might, be influenced by some strange algorithm.
Yeah. So in Vermont, I'll touch real quick on the racial disparities part of this, but one of the reasons that we had and continue to have, but it is in decline, one of the biggest disparities in incarceration in the country is because of our bail and bond system. A very quick example that I'll give you, a person from Burlington, well, first off, we all know our state's 95% white, so this person from Burlington, hypothetical person, is probably white. Let's say they're coming to Brattleboro with 300 bags of heroin. They get arrested in Brattleboro. They'll be able to leave Brattleboro with a citation, a paper citation in their hand. They can go back home to Burlington, but they have to drive back to Brattleboro to go to court a month or two down the road. Now, if a person from Keene, 15 minutes away, And since we know that most other states are more diverse, let's just say this hypothetical person is black, they come to Vermont with 10 bags of heroin for personal use, and they get arrested, they will have to stay in jail in Vermont because of this bizarre idea that if you have no ties to the community, then you're not going to come back to the community to answer to the charges that are brought forth. So that is one of the leading causes of our racial disparities in our state, that we are, what I've learned is, when you change one thing in the government, all these other areas are affected, and sometimes you have unforeseen consequences. Actually, probably 100% of the time you have unforeseen consequences. One issue that we've encountered is they've tried creating this system where for certain crimes you can't issue more than $200 bail, which is much more affordable than $1,000 or $5,000 bail. However, individuals who are impoverished and generally use bail bondsmen, the bail bondsman will not come out for anything under $1,000. So that person, instead of having to pay $20 to get out of jail, will have to pay the $200. And so I'm kind of getting off track from your original question, but to answer your question, Vermont is trying to move in that direction. But like I said, when you change one thing, it affects all these other things, and then so you have to go back and put out the fires there and try to make things slowly move forward. It's a slow process, but the values and the ideas do exist in the legislature right now to reform our criminal justice system and the way we incarcerate folks in the state.
And also, I don't know who heard public radio today, discussion with Attorney General T.J. Donovan, and it had to do with folks who are getting on the treadmill of it, like a ticket that's unpaid and another ticket and a build-up and driving without a driver's license suspended and so forth. It's only 280,000 Vermonters are driving with license suspended, I think was a statistic I heard, which I find hard to believe because that's like half of Vermont. But that's what they said on Jane's show this morning. That's what they said. What? So it's worth listening again, because maybe I got the statistic wrong, but I thought I heard them say that number, which just blew me away. And one of the things I thought of while I was driving along listening was, well, when we think about the fines that we pay and the tickets that we pay, or the fines for many low-level challenges, not having an inspection sticker or so forth, none of these are progressively rated, right? So for some folks, a $75 ticket for a fairly minor violation, they just write the check and don't even think about it. And for other folks, that's impossible. And they keep driving to work, and they get another ticket, and then they're pulled over and they check their run, and they've already got something else, and now you're in trouble because you never paid that ticket. And it's this spiral downward, again, because of economic challenges and injustice. I mean, I would love to see our ticketing system, whether it's for speeding or for other infractions, be income-based. And then folks would feel, if the idea is that a punishment is supposed to have you feel that pain so that it will deter you from doing that again in the future, then that pain, in order to feel it, has to be based on its relative scale to your income. And that's pretty radical and probably isn't going to happen anytime soon. But I just wanted to throw it out there as a way of thinking about a lot of this stuff, because the number of folks incarcerated, the meeting bail, these are all parts of that same conversation. In the back, and then we'll get you next, Spoon.
Oh, I heard Ann mention our representative and his position on the $15 minimum wage, and talked about the benefits cliff and trying to make an argument that it was bad because this group of people were then going to lose very important benefits like healthcare and stuff. And I'm having a hard time getting my head around that argument. So is there
me too.
Yeah, so I was just trying to figure out, is there any basis for the argument?
Well,
so what is the
they don't talk to enough people who are actually affected by that benefits cliff, is what I found out. Even when I sat down last year with some of our Windham County legislators, it was interesting for them to hear, that you'd rather not actually get food stamps because it's not that fun to fill out those applications, and that you'd rather just be paid enough to make your own choices about how you're going to spend your money. So partly, I think, is that they just make assumptions without talking to people. I think some of our legislators know a lot better what it's like to struggle than others do. So I think that's one of the reasons why we need to collect people's stories and have them present them to the I mean, the benefits cliff is real. It's not nothing. It does take an initial adjustment, you know, and I would say from my own personal experience, the thing that people really can't do without, I mean, $15 an hour is obviously not a king's ransom. You're not going to be living high on the hog. You're still not going to be able to afford childcare to get to work, and that's really essential for people. So getting things like, as we move towards universal pre-K, you know, there'll be fewer people who need to pay for childcare, but also making so that there's a much more generous subsidy for that and a much higher income level. So that is kind of goes in tandem with raising the wage.
Can I follow up with that if you're done? I didn't want to interrupt. Well, the argument's been made that it's 80% federal or some huge amount, so that if we're locked into this, that we can't even move any of these levels to help people who then would be going over the benefits cliff. Is that true? I mean, or isn't there some kind of flexibility in the legislature that could change the dynamic so people could get more subsidies if they needed it?
So there's a couple things. One is I just want to draw attention to my own website, ltgov.vermont.gov, because it has a sample of this economic benefits cliff. It's still up, right, Meg? To just show you on paper what we're talking about. For those that don't know, basically on a chart is your wages go up like this. When you're at the low end, there's a lot of different supports, whether it's healthcare, housing, reach up, childcare, food stamps, and those end up making it so that you can struggle through the day, but you can hopefully get through most of your challenges. As wages go up, the size of those supports gets smaller. And there comes a point where as they get smaller, they actually start to shrink faster than the wages going up. So at the top of the combined line is where you are economically. It does dip for a while, and then it goes back up as you make more and more wages. So that's what the benefits cliff is for anybody who's not familiar with that terminology, and there is a graph on the website. Many of those are matched by the federal government at 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, even 4-to-1. And what the legislature is trying to figure out, and I mostly agree with that, I'm not going to entirely agree, because I have heard directly from people who say, I'm not going to take more hours, or don't give me a pay increase, because that will bump me into a lesser economic circumstance. And some of those services have already disappeared by then. For others, it's absolutely true. The paperwork or the shame or the embarrassment, all of those things play in. So each person is an individual. So I think it's partly true, as you mentioned, for sure. But there are others for whom that has been an individual deterrent. They've told their own boss, don't give me an increase, which is so ridiculous that we've set up a system to do that. So the legislature in particular is looking at childcare, because it does seem like the hurdle that is hardest to do without is childcare, which makes sense because you obviously can't go work if you're trying to take care of a child. And so they're working on a way to try to figure out how to continue to fund childcare at a greater amount so that that dip at least is either level. Because if it was level, plenty of people would rather work more and not have that paperwork. And then you get to the other side and things start going up. So it's partly true, it's partly the complexity for sure.
Thank you.
Oh, Steph.
Just to quickly add, I think that there are some other elements that are important as well. So one is that one of the big initiatives in the state is to bring in young professionals. A lot of young professionals come to Vermont via higher education or for entry-level jobs. A lot of times they get into other things like school, civic service, or whatever, so they can't, or they have child, so they can't necessarily take on a full-time job, and if they do, it's a penalization. And I think just to be realistic about $15 an hour, if you make $18 or $19 an hour and you work part-time, you're only making $20,000 a year, roughly, right? So you're getting kicked off of healthcare for that. So $15 an hour is not a lot of money, especially if you are a young person or a person who is maybe elderly, who can only work a certain amount of hours because of physical limitations or other limitations or grandchildren or whatever else. And so that's one thing that the NAACP that we have seen a lot is that we have seen a lot of people in those two age demographics really being impacted in that way and not really knowing what to do, because there is this part of living in Vermont that people from other states come from, and they say, well, when I lived, in the South or the Midwest, or even in some of the Western parts of the world, I didn't have to do this. And I have to do this now, I have to go get stamps now. So like it's impactful in a lot of ways. And I also just want to add that we're talking about violations to basic human needs. So in the 21st century, the need to travel is a basic human need. If you get a ticket or a violation that you can't pay, you still have to travel. If you're a person of color, if you are a young mother, or if you're just somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck, whoever you are, your basic human right has just been violated, and you don't have the funds to actually offset that. So I think that just to bring the conversation kind of out of the sky and onto the ground a little bit, not saying that you aren't doing that, but I'm just saying that it's a very, very real situations where people are living these everyday lives, and that we see that, and there's something that they can do. And so sometimes in between like getting bills passed and things like that, real consequences happen, and that would make somebody run out of the state very quickly. I mean, I would, so just wanted to add that in there. And that's something that we have seen. And if you are having issues like that, please do reach out to the NAACP chapter here, especially around health, because it is one of our game changers. So thank you.
Yeah. No offense taken, don't worry about that. None at all. Spoon, yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to share my observation that if one is to believe that a $15 an hour wage would be harmful to the economy, then one is essentially saying that we can't have a good economy, if that's what you call it, unless a large segment of our population is living in poverty. And in fact, that has been the history of the United States. That in fact, the growth of this country, even from its very beginning, through about 2/3 of its whole history, has been built on the backs of slaves and to a lesser extent indentured servants and the exploited immigrants and underclasses. It was not until we saw unions in the late 30s and then finally in the mid-50s that we also saw a solid middle class. So that middle class was built on the backs of the poor. And that deeply is what scares us, a lot of us, because we who are in the middle class, we feel that our foundation will be pulled out from under us if we actually eliminated poverty. When in fact, of course, we could eliminate poverty simply by sharing the wealth from the wealthy, and it would not affect the middle class at all.
Thank you, Spoon. Yes.
Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here tonight. I want to thank everybody that made all this happen, first of all. I'm part of the very new, but part of the Vermont Workers Center. And my two little moments is to raise everyone's awareness, because healthcare is, if you don't have your health, what's going to happen in life, right? So, but if you need help, if you need help with your health, you need someone who's talented and understands and can help you. And so I'm from the workforce health. You need healthy workers, whether it's what they get reimbursed for their time to then spread it around the economy and take care of their families. But in Vermont, we are surrounded by Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, every state in New England, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. I mean, there is all the states around us that have a law that protects workers, particularly healthcare workers. Sometimes it's very narrow and it protects nurses. But what that law does is when they've finished their workday, they get to go home. We don't have that law in Vermont. We don't have that law. If you go to work and somebody isn't hiring enough people, or they can't manage their institution, they can make you stay there. And that's what happens where I work every single day. And we take care of people who are tiny little children all the way up to old folks. And it has to stop. And so I want you to know that there is an effort to get this law into Vermont. And so learn about it, talk to your legislator, talk to your doctors and your nurses when you go, because we can't attract people to come here and take care of us and our families if we can't compete. And it's way overdue. I mean, we're talking years that all the states around us have had this protection in place. And you don't have to worry that when the clock strikes, you know, oh, it's 11 o'clock, I gotta go home, and then all of a sudden they're gonna walk out of the surgery. No, no, no. Don't worry about your kind of care. You've got nursing boards, you've got doctor boards. There's already things in place to make sure that you're well taken care of, but you want a healthy person to take care of you. And that is really an important thing that's near and dear to my heart. And I just wanted to take a few minutes of everyone's time to let you know that, because it's connected to everything you've talked about tonight. It's
Absolutely.
connected to everything.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. I'm going to wrap it up. Go ahead, sir. I'm sorry. We'll squeeze you in if we can be quick.
I'll try. Colin, I live in Rockingham, just down the road. I know a lot of people here. And I don't know a lot, so I'm going to assume there's more than a few that aren't from Bellows Falls. The square, right down there, a lot of the local businesses. Been in and out, in and out. They come, they can't afford it, they leave. Raising the minimum wage to $15 is just going to hurt them. Or, oh no, wait, I could get my thoughts. I got lost. This is going to hurt them. As well as disincentivize more businesses from coming to the state of Vermont. I've been working all week, I'm tired, forgive me. Disincentivizes businesses from coming to Vermont because the work labor, although you said it was 40% of your farm, right? Well, 40%, even if it's not 2%, that's 2% of 40%, whatever, 1% you can save by going to another state. Especially Vermont, we're so small. I can walk to New Hampshire. Most places can either walk to New Hampshire or to New York. So yeah, we already have really high corporate tax. How do you want to get businesses here if we continue to disincentivize them coming here? We need more jobs so people can be more employed.
Well, I appreciate that, and I want to make sure everyone recognizes that it's important to welcome different perspectives. So thank you for joining us. When you actually look at statistics for why populations are leaving Vermont or not, with respect to the reality versus sort of the blue-red policy argument that's often put out there, populations are diminishing in rural areas all across the country. Even if you look at New Hampshire, if you're within an hour of Boston, population is going up. If you're farther away, it's going down. If you go into Nebraska, rural areas all across the country are actually seeing population declines and aging populations. It actually isn't minimum wage or healthcare or housing policy that's driving those populations out. It's that people are moving into urban and suburban areas. That's the fundamental fact, regardless of any kind of policies put in place by governments. So then the question is, what's going to draw people to Vermont? And for the last 2 years, we've started seeing an increase in population, although it's primarily up towards Chittenden County. And that's mostly because, oddly enough, housing prices in Massachusetts have now come above their pre-recession levels. And most people don't want to sell their homes and move until they feel like they're getting the top dollar that their place was once worth. And so as the overall economy has grown, and then finally Massachusetts is actually above water, now those folks are willing to sell and move here. So what is it that we can do to attract people or keep people? I would argue expanding broadband so that those better paying jobs could be here, and young people who want to have internet and even cell phone access would want to live here. Childcare. Those are the hurdles that are much, much bigger with respect to having people come or stay than leave. But statistically, the analysis has been done. There may be a couple thousand fewer jobs, but 60,000 people will have more money to go into these stores and buy those products. It's documented pretty widely that that's the case. I respect the different opinion, but if again, the argument is, we gotta just keep going to lower and lower wages to compete to the lowest common denominator, then our system has completely failed. Should we just have more and more money in the wealthiest hands and less in working people? No, I don't think so. I think we have a thriving national economy that is not actually thriving for 90% of the population. Yes, in the back.
Well, you covered a couple of things, nice jam right here in Rockingham. One of them is affordable housing. So I've had friends that have been looking for apartments, and they're, single mom, with a child, they can't afford the rents. So that's a real problem, especially in this area. There's a lot of apartments here, but a lot of people don't want to rent those apartments. They're not in great shape. Again, the opiate problem comes into that. So that's a real concern. I was wondering how that might be addressed. And then to the gentleman from the NAACP, I hope there's something that you can put on to maybe help people realize what we can do to become allies for people of color. Because we definitely need to reach out and to bridge that gap. Because as you said, 95% white. A lot of people here, I'm from Boston, I've been in Vermont for 13 years, and it took a long time to get used to lack of diversity and lack of ethnic food, right? It was really hard. But I'm seeing more diversity, but I'm also seeing people not quite sure how to start that conversation. So if you could, that would be a great thing if you could think about that for us. Thank you.
Well, so right now we do have, just practically speaking, we do have a website, and it's Windham County NAACP.org. If you just put it in the Google search, it's the first thing that pops up. We also have an email, info@windhamNAACP.org, that you can reach us at. And then after this, maybe you and I could also just chat and exchange, personal information. Because that does seem to be common, that a lot of people do want to engage, but they're really they have a hard time figuring out how to engage. And I think it's been also a challenge for us that maybe other branches don't really have to, it's just a challenge that we have that's unique to Vermont and the ruralness of the state. So yeah, just let me know and I'd be happy to connect with you. And then I also just wanted to say one thing, just to address what you had said. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but hi. Just to address what you had said. So one thing is that we're talking, like I said again, we're talking about a basic human rights issue. A lot of people, when they come here, they can't actually travel to those businesses. It's like those businesses have a hard time keeping their doors open because they don't have workers. And a lot of it is because of things like housing discrimination, or just they can't find housing, or if they do get a violation of some sort, there's incentives to leave. And so so a lot of it is not really based on the minimum wage. Actually, I think if we think about tax time, especially for people who don't make much, if you do get a little bit back in your taxes, that is when you do your shopping, you buy your TV, you go buy your good food, things like that. So I will say that I think that there is an incentive to pay people more, and I think that when we look at it that way, we're asking the wrong questions, and we're not really looking at it from the perspectives of the marginalized, but the people who are in the majority, which are usually not small business owners.
So I think we're going to wrap up. I want to thank Ellen and Stefan and Ann and Nader for being up here with me to communicate and answer your questions. So we can give them a round of applause, please. And very much want to thank Rights and Democracy for helping sponsor this, as well as NAACP Windham, and we've had a number of other sponsors both for this event and other events around the state that we're going to be having. Please feel free to reach out to my office, ltgov.vermont.gov. Sign up for the newsletter if you want, or take a business card so you've got our contact information. And James, did you want to say something to close out at all? Or?
Just Nancy.
Nancy, okay. So thank you all. I really appreciate it, and we'll be available in a minute. Nancy, here we go.
No, James first.
Well, I just want to mainly thank all of you for coming. My name is James Haslam. I'm the Executive Director of Rights and Democracy, and it's just so great to be down here, with all of you. This is, the beginning of a bunch of these events around the state. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for doing these with us, having these conversations. This is this dialogue of talking about this, even when we don't agree, is incredibly important for us to be able to figure out how to move forward. I've had the privilege to be able to work with people around the state to try to organize since the late 90s. Was working to raise the minimum wage back then when the minimum wage was actually $5.25 an hour. They said the same exact things, about what was going to happen to our economy. Now it's more than double that. Our economy continues to grow. Where we have raised the wages in this country, and you look at countries that have higher wages, it goes back to what Reed Webster said in the beginning. This is how we inject money into our economies. So we need to support our local businesses. One of the biggest things that we can do to support our local businesses is really try to figure out how we can actually support that. With Amazon and all this kind of stuff, there's all kinds of opportunities to buy things outside of our communities. And so we need to have a strong economy. And it just cannot, as Spoon had said, we cannot have it be based on, essentially exploitation by paying poverty wages to be able to have, some people struggle and suffer, is part of it. That's why we're doing this town hall for, economy for all. We think it can happen. We can have a universal healthcare system, as Alan was talking about. We can have, Medicare for all in this country. We also can have, a Green New Deal. This is a time when this country is talking about transforming our economy. So it's not based on, it's important what Spoon was saying around the history that we're, living with. You think about how this country was founded, why it is white occupied in Vermont right now, and the legacy of what it was built on, and also the promise of the progress that we've made, but how far we still have to go. So having an economy that works for all. Rights and Democracy is in Vermont and in New Hampshire. Thankfully, we're pushing for raising the minimum wage over there. It's still $7.25 an hour. They just passed a bill today, it came out of one of the committees for a $12 an hour minimum wage. There's a big push over there. Our folks were working hard on that. So we're just super excited. Rights and Democracy is a membership organization. We work with important organizations like the Workers Center and NAACP, Green Mountain Self-Advocates, disability rights organizations also supporting this. But we're members. That the way we get things done is through people. We don't have a lot of money that we say rights and democracy are things that we win. No one gives them to us. So we hope that we can have a strong. We know that the Southern Vermont does not get as much organizing attention as other parts of the state, and so we're very committed to working with all of you, and super excited to be down here in Bellows Falls. And I'm going to turn over to Nancy, who's been, Nancy and Ann have been two of our early members that have been building down in Brattleboro about how we can build a chapter down here. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I'll try to be fast, but I just want to begin by saying that I am not low income. I'm a bookstore owner, and I feel every bit as strongly about building a just and fair society as those people that you've heard who are personally having huge economic problems, because frankly, just because you're comfortable, it does not mean you want to live in a society where millions of people are suffering. It's just, it's really painful. Also, even if you're not one of the people suffering, knowing that that's going on, and no matter what you do, I plan on working my ass off for the rest of my life to try to make sure that this is not continuing. So I feel like you've heard the discussion of the issues. To make real change in Vermont, local organizing is what we need to make it happen. And I feel like RAD has been really a good organization for us to possibly work with around here, because a lot of organizations that call themselves statewide basically do everything that they do in Montpelier and Burlington, and we really don't know who they are or see them. And RAD has made a strong effort to come down to this part of the state. They have organizers here, and I feel like for us, we really do. This county is not a wealthy county. We really need to put all of our efforts into making this a better place. And so now is the time to get organized, Windham County. And Ann and I would be happy to talk to anybody else who lives in the Brattleboro area, that catchment, that is interested in working more with RAD as more, sort of a person who does some organizing. Reed back there, who I think people here know. Please talk to Reed or Joy if you live in Bellows Falls and you want to start working more seriously with RAD, become a person who's involved in an organizing circle. And for everybody here, please, if you're not a member of RAD at this point, please come to the table, please join. And we really, really want to make this a membership organization that includes I'd love it to include the majority of people in Vermont and the majority of people in New Hampshire. That's a wonderful goal. I think we can get there. So this is a good start, and these events are happening all over, and hopefully that we'll be getting leaders developing, and we'll be getting lots of new members. Thank you all for coming.